Write that down for me, Saito. Write that down for me,
Saito. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Let's write that down. I'm Justin Knipper. I edit at FightGameMedia.com. I'm a staff writer at WrestlingObserver.com. I am back with Japan's leading pro wrestling historian and editor and broadcast journalist and author. All those good things, Mr. Fumi Saito. Yes, we're back. Special feature, special edition episode on the legendary Hiro Matsuda, one of the most influential figures in modern pro wrestling history. All right, so before we get rolling, I wanted to give a special shout out to Steve Madison. Okay, he's a great wrestler and he's a big supporter of the podcast. So here's why I'm shouting Steve out. I'm shouting him out not just because he's a fantastic guy and has a really cool background in Japanese pro wrestling, which I'm sure we'll get to down the road. But actually, Steve, he's the one who suggested that we actually cover Hiro Matsuda in the first place. Okay, so get this. Steve happens to be a close family friend of Hiro Matsuda's widow and daughter, Judy and Stephanie Kojima. And he also mentioned that they're weekly listeners of the show now, which is amazing. So huge shout out to the Kojima family and Steve Madison for the amazing support. Thank you. And thanks to Steve for suggesting the topic, because of course Hiro Matsuda is somebody that, if you're familiar with the show, he's somebody that we're going to cover sooner or later. There's lots to cover. But when I brought it up to Fumi, we just got right into the show. It just snowballed from a few ideas from Fumi into a situation where I just had to hit record and let it flow. And it turned out to be a great episode. We covered a lot of different topics, ones that are parallel to topics that we've covered on the show, but ones that we just haven't been able to get to yet. All right. I mean, from Hiro Matsuda's early career in Japan to coming to the Americas through Peru and later Mexico and later Texas, and be able to establish himself as this important mover and shaker during the territorial days of pro wrestling, very different ecosystem compared with today. When he was in the US, I mean, Matsuda left a significant imprint on the industry, and not just as a wrestler, as an in-ring talent. I think maybe even more so as a trainer. Having trained the likes of megastars throughout the years. He's trained Hulk Hogan. Matsuda's trained Ron Simmons, Lex Luger, Hercules Hernandez, Scott Hall, among others. In addition to being, I guess you could call him Japan's first true freelance wrestler. And he also became the first Japanese, native or expat to invest in foreign territory when he was a shareholder, Championship Wrestling from Florida. A lot of what Hiro Matsuda did was simply, it just hadn't ever been done before. And what he set up, the template he created, is still clearly it's followed and respected, and has evolved from where Hiro Matsuda started off not just as being a wrestler, but being the man, the point person, the connection between two international companies. And what's interesting is his ultimate choice was to move to the States, move away from home and make his life in the States. It's a unique wrestling story, but it's just a unique adventure in itself. And I'm happy to share it with all of you, and I was happy to talk about it with Fumi in today's episode. So let's get into it shortly. Before we start, if you have not already, please hit the subscribe button, Fight Game Media Network. Find it on whichever platform you usually use, Apple or Spotify. Hit the subscribe button, please. It helps us out very much. Let's get right into it. Today's episode, the one, the only, the very influential Hiro Matsuda.
We changed plan. Let's have Mr. Hiro Matsuda episode today. Now that you sent me messages that Hiro Matsuda's wife, widow, and his daughter was listening to our podcast. And so and somebody asked you to do the Hiro Matsuda piece, and I believe Hiro Matsuda is such a big part of wrestling history and a big influential figure, but often so overlooked. Now that it's 2022, that he passed away back in 1999, that it's been 20 years, that if we don't, go over his legacy and accomplishment and the influence he had in the wrestling business in Japan and America at the same time, that that his legacy has already been overlooked, but it will be forgotten. Not good, that we gotta have today's audience learn and know about Hiro Matsuda. That's what I'm trying.
Thanks to Steve Madison, big supporter of the show and pro wrestler himself, he's the one who let me know about the Matsuda family being new. Write that down, listeners. Thank you, everyone. And any new listeners that have actually jumped on board the past couple months, welcome. And thanks for all the kind words lately on the last couple shows in the Funks and such. But yeah, so today
was Funk's good, good reaction.
I mean, it's kind of, it's the Funks. You can't really go wrong. Everybody will enjoy it. I think if you're already here and we do an episode on the Funks, I think you'll enjoy the ride. But thanks to Steve Madison today, we're gonna look at very, like you said, overlooked aspects of Hiro Matsuda's career all over the world. I don't want to just say in the States, in Japan. He's all over.
Right, and very influential. And before we forget, he is the one who trained Hulk Hogan, Paul Orndorff, Hercules Hernandez, Lex Luger,
Ron Simmons, Scott Hall,
and more. And Scott Hall,
a lot of the most famous big guys from the 80s and 90s.
And after 1 year as a young lion, New Japan sent young Keiji Muto to Florida. Hiro Matsuda was the one who was waiting for young Muto to arrive in Florida. He trained him too. So some people say that Hiro Matsuda trained Keiji Muto too, and partially
he did have a kind of a lot of training with Matsuda in Florida and the South area.
Yeah, and he only trained big guys. There wasn't. We have to point that out that there was no such thing as wrestling school then. You have to be recognized by somebody who are in the business. They don't even smart you up until your first match. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. They just train.
And you mentioned there was an expression that was used a long time ago, policeman. And that's what Mr. Matsuda,
policeman.
You described him as a policeman or...
Yeah, somebody in wrestling office that sometimes, the big football player or big street fighter or the young big guy or big bouncer who want to be wrestler or challenge wrestler. Wrestling is fake, right? And then some big guy will want to challenge you, in the fight, in a real fight. And usually it was Hiro Matsuda who took on those newcomers, and bring them to dojo and see what you can do. And then they think wrestling is easy because it's fake or something. And Hiro Matsuda was there to stretch him and smiling. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, you see, that's how Hulk Hogan thing started. That Hulk Hogan thought, young Terry Bollea, right? Back in
Florida,
1976, that you had to start. Yeah, Tampa, Florida, when he was still playing bass player in local band Rockas. Yeah, he, of course, a big wrestling fan. He was in the front row seat and telling people he is like superstar Billy Graham protege or something, with tie-dye T-shirt on and everything. But he came to Tampa's the Tampa Sportatorium, which was also NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida office. That you got to start from somewhere, right? So young Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, came to the office, like wanting to be a wrestler. How can I be a professional wrestler? May I? I mean, is this where you start? I mean, you would do that, right? And Hiro Matsuda said, okay, come on over. And then took him to back the office. And there's a hidden wrestling mat in there that just stretched him. And Hiro Matsuda didn't think Terry and Boleo would come back next day, which he did. He showed up next day. All right, let's do it again, right? So it's like, wow, this guy must have it, right? So he decided to train him. I mean, from the Hindu squat. All right, today we're gonna do the 1,000 Hindu squat. If you can do it, you can come back tomorrow, kind of thing. Isn't that interesting?
And that's just one of big stars that he ended up training in the 80s. But yeah, he had a clear vision for these bigger guys who were already athletic coming into his style of training, and show them how to.
Yeah, because in America you already have a lot of big guys, whereas Japanese wrestling dojo, I mean, good athlete right out of high school, but you still 170-pound guys, right? You're gonna train, eat, sleep, breathe, living in dojo. You have chanko food and just put on the weight, lift weight, wrestle, practice, sleep, breathe, all these things. And 1 year later, you have wrestler's body or something. But in America, you already have a lot of big guys just out of the local gym. And Hulk Hogan was a big guy. And what he needed was that he needed Hiro Matsuda style of training or like a learning discipline, right? Yeah. And I guess young Terry Bollea, young Hulk Hogan had more guts than Hiro Matsuda anticipated. And the rest of the story, huh? But he was like that. So he stretched many wrestlers or like challenging fans or doubters or the Omo Drifter type or some football player who thought wrestling was easy way to make money. So it's like, how can I be a pro wrestler? Hiro Matsuda will be there to stretch you, so they'll give up, kind of thing. Yeah. So that's what the Policeman was. And also at the wrestling shows in old days, 60s and 70s, probably way before, way back 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s even, that at the wrestling card at the a show, I mean like a wrestling show in the building, sometimes this somebody from out of arena, out of the seat, will challenge wrestler. You know what I'm saying? I mean, fight. Yeah, challenge professional wrestler for fight, and not everybody can take that challenge. I mean, because this fan guy who want to beat wrestler got everything to gain, and professional wrestler who take challenge got
I mean,
everything
that
to
was the
lose.
classic. That this would always happen for years and years. Probably still does to an extent at shows when you.
Just at the independent show,
No,
not the WWE show. WWE probably run the angle out of it, like as if somebody jumped over the guardrail, and the security guard will take him to the back, but it was an angle or something. But that's the parody of it. And in the old days, a lot of times, somebody, I mean, would challenge professional wrestler, to prove themselves or something. And Mr. Wrestling Tim, Tim Woods lost his finger of it, because of it, 'cause somebody bit his pinky off. And Masa Saito used to take up the challenge in Atlanta and Florida. Masa Saito did that. Young Adrian Adonis took on, anybody in Amarillo, Texas. When he became Adrian Adonis, he was taking an all-comers all challenge out of arena. So there was such thing. I mean, traditionally in professional wrestling, you pro wrestler will be challenged by this, wannabe or I mean, like a street fighter, like a very confident guy that I can beat pro wrestler. Ha ha ha. Then you need somebody that legitimately tough enough to beat these
yeah,
people for
wrestling
real.
will always have. When you have alcohol served at a venue, you'll always get people who their ego somehow gets inflated, and they have this idea in their head that they're tougher. They see what the wrestlers are doing. They go, I can do that. It's been since the carnival days like that. So
Yeah, I'm
I
pretty
think
sure. Yeah,
that's
yeah. I think one of the origin of work too. You know, a lot of times your challenger out of the arena was like a planted too. You know, but sometimes you get legit challenger like that. You need somebody who can handle this, and Hiro Matsuda was that. Yeah,
he
interesting, huh?
was a trailblazer. He was because it seemed like he was one of the first people from Japan to freelance and to
Freelancer.
kind of
Yeah, yeah. He was born in 1937. 1937. Okay. And when he was 17, he watched Rikidozan on television. It was Rikidozan Masahiko Kimura against Sharp
mhm,
Brothers, the historical fight. You know,
the
the
famous
beginning of television, beginning of
first
wrestling.
match in pro wrestling.
Yeah. And yeah, you and I talked about this over and over and over that the beginning of wrestling in Japan, beginning of television. And Hiro Matsuda was one of those generation that watched Rikidozan on TV. And he decided to join Rikidozan's dojo in 1956 when he was just 18, before his 19th birthday. Yeah, 1956 then. Yeah. Then before Okinawa was returned to Japan, Okinawa wouldn't be part of Japan until, believe it or not, 1972. All through 50s and 60s, Okinawa was still
Mhm.
under US. Okay. And Ricky Dozan had Okinawa tour. And in Okinawa, there was just like what we talked about, that Okinawa native karate master challenged Ricky Dozan for real. You know, that uh, they didn't know how tough professional wrestlers were. And but this Okinawa native master thought they could beat wrestlers, right? And Ricky Dozan, okay, took the challenge. Instead, Ricky Dozan didn't go in the ring. He sent young rookie Hiro Matsuda, or I should say Yasuhiro Kojima at the time. He sent young Hiro Matsuda into the ring with this karate guy instead. And I guess Hiro Matsuda had to do it, and he beat this karate guy in Okinawa. And this 19-year-old Hiro Matsuda thought he did it for the company, he did it for wrestling, he did it for everybody, like
Mm.
a big sacrifice, huh? And but this is kind of sketchy. But from what I understand, Ricky Dawson didn't even pat his back, right?
That's the myth, right? The legend.
And yeah, it's a myth. That's a myth. Yeah, I wasn't there obviously, but there's like a couple different versions of story to that. But that happened in 1957, January. Then that year, young Hiro Matsuda, or I should say Yasuhiro Kojima, decided to leave the country, decided to leave wrestling. I mean, leave Rikidozan dojo because he wanted to be wrestler. He wanted to see the world. And it's not like he was like a big, huge, I mean, Rikidozan fan that he wanted to be with Rikidozan. It was, of course, he was a fan of Rikidozan, but he was more of a wrestling, like not a fan, but the wrestling, professional wrestling is something that can take him to the world, see the world. You know, you become professional wrestler. That'll open the door to the world, kind of thing. And that's exactly what
Yeah,
he did,
and you
huh?
said that before he was in the States, he was Peru.
Right after this, after he quit Rikidozan Dojo and JWA, it wasn't a big deal because one of the
Mhm.
younger guys quit, huh? And they didn't really think much of him. And it took him another year until the young Yasuhiro Kojima left the country. He had relative in Peru, and he went to when he was 22. He finally went to his mother's side's relative who was living in 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 Peru, and that's where he actually started wrestling career. So he had Japanese training and already debuted, but one of the younger guy, right? And he did the training on his own for 1 year. And when he was 22, he finally went to Peru and went to Peru and then had a lucha libre experience. Yeah, his in Peru and Mexico, his very first ring name was Ernesto Kojima,
Mhm.
like Ernest, right? Yeah, Ernesto Kojima was his very first ring name until he finally went from Peru to Mexico, Mexico to finally to Texas in 1961, Houston, Texas, for the promoter Maurice Siegel, very famous promoter Maurice Siegel. He who was responsible of discovering Antonino Rocca later on. Yeah, and in Houston, his first ring name was Kojima Saito.
Two
Interesting, huh?
surnames.
Two last
Like
names,
Smith
yeah.
Johnson.
Two family names. Yeah, yeah. Like, well, they did that with like Oyama
Yeah.
Kato or something like that, Yeah. Kojima Saito was his. I guess Saito, like my name, it's so common, it's so boring, therefore it's so stereotype. Let's use it, right? Kind of thing. Yeah. Kojima Saito and Duke Kelmuka became tag team in 1961. That on he from Texas territory to all the Southern territory to Midwestern territory after territory, and 1962 in Kansas City, Gusto Cares, the promoter Gusto Cares, who discovered people like Harley Race. Okay, Gusto Cares gave him Hiro Matsuda ring name. You know what the Hiro Matsuda was, at the beginning? He is actually the third Matsuda in wrestling history.
So he was the third, then who came before that?
Very first Matsuda was Sorakichi Matsuda, very first Japanese professional wrestler in 1860s.
Oh.
Sorakichi Matsuda, who was a sumo wrestler in Japan. He traveled to got on the boat, big boat in Yokohama, and escaped from sumo world. And 1 year later, he was discovered in New York. Discovered meaning like he finally was on newspaper that he had a wrestling match, and he had a big wrestling. Sorakichi Matsuda was the very first known Japanese professional wrestler in America. Not just in America, but established professional wrestler, Japanese professional wrestler. That's the original Matsuda, Sorakichi Matsuda. And in 1920s, there's a second Matsuda, that the Matty Matsuda, that welterweight and junior welterweight world champion in Texas. The second Matsuda, Matty Matsuda. Okay, so Sorakichi Matsuda and Matty Matsuda, and the old promoter thought this guy has got to be Matsuda, so he became Hiro Matsuda.
Yeah, there's the
Does that make sense?
wrestling tradition. Sometimes you do find that throughout wrestling history, there are a couple wrestlers, same
last name,
not real last name, just working name.
Yeah, but even like closer to today's, the wrestling history, Arn Anderson is never Anderson family. When you talk about Anderson family, the Gene Anderson, the Ollie Anderson, the Larry Anderson, the Gene and Ollie, I think was real brothers. But the reason young Arn Anderson down in Georgia was named Arn Anderson looked just like younger Ollie Anderson. That was the reason. Well, he can get by being Anderson. So last name, yeah, like a Golden Graham brothers. The Eddie, the first one was what's Vince McMahon's
Superstar Billy Graham.
Superstar. No, way before that. That original
Dr.
Jerry
Jerry
Graham.
Graham.
Yeah, Dr. Jerry Graham. Yeah, Jerry Graham, older brother. The second brother, Eddie Graham. The third brother, Luke Graham. Wrestling brothers, not related. Or Jimmy Valiant and Johnny Valiant. Valiant brothers. They are not.
Or how
brothers.
about
You know what I'm saying? So they
Double
are.
Inoue?
Oh, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue just happen to have same
But
last
they're not
name. That's it.
related.
But they're real.
They were a
Oh
team.
no, not related at all. And they were a team and started the same year. Oh, I don't want to talk about myself, but in high school there was at least 15 Saitos in my high school class, and I always never wanted to have another Saito.
There's a lot. Saito's a common name. Saito, Suzuki.
Oh, super common name. Sato, the Yamada. Yeah. This is so boring. But anyway, he was named like Kojima Saito first, but the Kansas City promoter Gusto Cares gave him Hiro Matsuda that he would keep forever. Yeah. So Yasuhiro Kojima became forever Hiro Matsuda. Yeah, Matsuda is like a real traditional wrestling name in America. Sorakichi Matsuda, Mari Matsuda, and Hiro Matsuda. None of them related. Yeah. Uh, Useless trivia. Sorakichi Matsuda, real name. I mean, that Matsuda is a real name. And Mari Matsuda's, that's his real name. But for Hiro Matsuda, his real last name is always Kojima. Yasuhiro Kojima. It's pretty hard for American to
Is
pronounce
it?
that, huh?
I don't know. Kojima?
I don't know. I mean, pretty long.
Mhm.
Yasuhiro Kojima.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
that
think
can
it
be.
has good
Yeah.
rhythm to it. Sure, why
Yeah.
not? I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's
I guess
been
that,
over time.
but
We've been not. It's not just with the West and Japan, but it's also just the entire world is a little more literate when it comes to how things sound, how names and words in other languages sound. There's a generally higher education about it. So I think, yeah, and that, I mean, hey, look,
right.
Konosuke Takeshita is not a simple name, and
That's pretty hard,
he's still very popular. So
Right.
I think years ago, though,
Right,
there
right.
was that worry that promoters had that they had to simplify the name to make sure that
Or you always use
and put
stereotype,
Mr. in front of the name. Mr.
Mr.
Fuji.
Saito. Yeah, instead of Masa Saito. Yeah, Mr. Fuji. Right. Mr.
And it had a
Sato.
very James Bond 007 feel. What was his name? Odd Job.
Odd job,
Yep.
Tash Togo. Yeah. Yeah. It's not even Tash. It's
Tosh.
Toshi. Right? T-O-A. Yeah. But they dropped I and it just became Tash. That's easier to pronounce, right? Or by mistake, somebody printed T-O-S-H instead of T-O-S-H-I. And then you just become Tash. Mr. Pogo, remember? Onita's big rival, Mr. Pogo? He meant to be Mr. Togo. T-O-G-O. It's just like a great Togo. But there's misprinted on the program Pogo instead of Togo, like a P. That on, he just became Mr. Pogo the rest of his career.
I think that's kind of a common occurrence in when Japanese stars come over and start making their name. Yeah, the same story I heard happened with wrestler Nosawa Rongai. The story I was told was that when he was working in Mexico and he was on the phone telling the promoter what's the name to put down for him, and I think his surname is Nozawa, which is a regular name.
Nozawa instead of Z. I mean,
yeah, and I think they
No is N Z O W instead of S.
So the promoter in Mexico put the S, and again, like Mr. Pogo, he just kept the stylization and spelling, and here he is.
Yeah, rest of his. Well, then again, it worked out. Well, actually, Great Muta too. It's always Keiji Muto, right? M-O-T-O.
H and U and
Great Muta. Yeah, Great Muto. Muta. It's like they were. I mean, same spelling. M-U-T-O. They were still, pronounce it like Muta. Then the Great Muta is M-U-T-A instead. But it kind of stuck. Yeah. But that happens. But if they're okay about it, I guess that's your name now.
Yeah. And sometimes that's a easy way of giving your name some flair that you wouldn't have otherwise because you couldn't think of it. Because you didn't think of it. Because sometimes these are happy accidents, fortuitous incidents that,
happy accident? That sounds good.
Imagine if Mr. Pogo was called Mr. Togo. It would kind of different.
Togo, it's just almost like a ripoff from the big heel, persona.
I would just think Tosh Togo,
not original.
I mean, sure. I mean, if there already is a Togo, probably think.
Oh no, but the Great Togo and Tash Togo was Togo brothers.
So that's why it's kind of, I think, a good thing, or maybe a blessing it was for Mr. Pogo that he didn't become Mr. Togo.
Pogo to not do. Yeah, there was another Togo, in Kansas City.
Mm,
Eigen Haruka used his Togo name too for a while. So Togo is another very stereotypical
mhm,
Japanese, heel ring name. Anyhow, Hiro Matsuda name was given, to
mhm.
Yasuhiro Kojima. The first Kojima Saito wouldn't stick, just two last name, that the Matsuda name was more, meant to be this guy will be very, like pretty much a main event star. If promoter Gastro Carousel named this Japanese wrestler a Matsuda, it would be just like Sorakichi Matsuda or Mari Matsuda. This is the third Matsuda. It's like the champion caliber, right? So yeah, so I guess that Matsuda name was very much the blessing from the promoter, all the promoter. And also he was the freelancer, very first American Japanese freelancer with no Japanese company connection. I don't think Ricky Dawson helped him at all on that. And he just took his own path, went to Peru, went up to Mexico, from Mexico to Texas, and finally start working in the states, the mainland states. And I mean, like all the generation wrestlers do, that you travel from territory to territory, like nomad working, right? Worker today, what
But
they
I
call it.
think what people need to realize as well, this is in the 60s, and pro wrestling in Japan
Yeah,
hadn't even
early '60s.
wasn't that old. It hadn't aged that much. It was still new. Everything was new. This was unprecedented. This hadn't been done before. There was Riki Dozan's group.
Oh, he very first in the smaller group, but they've been conquered by Rikidozan's JWA and pretty much monopoly in Japan. And Rikidozan passed away while Hiro Matsuda was away from home. I mean, like trying to make it in America, and news traveled very slow back. The what Hiro Matsuda was doing in the first 5 year period. I don't think Japanese media or Japanese wrestling fan paid much attention to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed to me. It seems like at that time, if it wasn't Dozan's story, it was that was he was the news until other stars came in, got bigger like Giant Baba.
Yeah, in '64, 2 years after his Hiro Matsuda's American debut, in July of 1964, he beat Danny Hodge and became NWA
This
World
was
Junior
big.
Heavyweight Champion. That's big, without any connection or the strong tie with any establishment or promoters. Or I mean, he was a wrestler,
Hmm?
like a working horse, right? Yeah. If today's the listeners out there don't know who Danny Hodge is, he was two-time Olympian. That the 1948 London Olympic and 1952 Helsinki Olympic. He went to Olympic in wrestling twice and got the silver medal in 1952 Helsinki Olympic. Then became professional boxer of all people. And Hulk Hogan wasn't the very first professional wrestler to be on cover of Sports Illustrated. It was Danny Hodge who was the very first professional wrestler who made the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine.
I didn't know that.
Did you know that? Hmm. But Danny Hodge, I'm talking about Danny Hodge, how big of a star he was. Hiro Matsuda beat Danny Hodge to become NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion when there was heavyweight champion of the world and junior heavyweight champion of the world. And Danny Hodge pretty much was like that was his title. That he traveled, but he was from Oklahoma and he based in Oklahoma and he traveled to the Louisiana, Texas, and Florida, but mainly Southern Territory, huh? And in those territories, the junior heavyweight world NWA junior heavyweight world championship was the main event instead of well, of course, the world heavyweight champion will travel, to your territory once or twice a year, but also Danny Hodge at the time, NWA junior heavyweight champion, was also traveling champion. And Danny Hodge Hiro Matsuda matchup, that the single match program became such a what would you call it, like a you know the main event card, like a set, like almost a set price that they'll bring in both Hiro Matsuda and Danny Hodge together to have title match in your
Mhm.
town. Does that make sense?
That was the headliner, that was the show.
Yeah, yeah. So they did that in Florida. They did that in Oklahoma. They did that in Louisiana. They did that in Mississippi and all the southern territories. And that was like a golden money card for years. And after, you see, I didn't understand what would make 90-minute title match. Because the first meeting they usually had 60-minute time of
Mhm.
draw. You know what I'm saying? And they'll bring in the same matchup, same title match, second time in the same city. That this time, that the 60-minute didn't do it, so they'll make 90-minute title match. Then they do the 90-minute Broadway too, like a marathon.
I mean, even for that time, I know it was a little more common, but 90 minutes, that's a long time.
But the wrestling match, the title match or your main event in 60s, usually the one match will last 45 minutes, 2 out of 3 full match. One match will take up just about 1 hour. You know what I'm saying? And that was a style. But Hiro Matsuda was the type of wrestler that can who can wrestle Danny Hodge for that length of time. Yeah, I mean, if you do the 90-minute match, it's gotta be like a wrestling match.
You can't phone it in, you can't really.
Oh no, you can't do the forearm smash
And,
for 90 minutes. No.
so there's 2 things that I think about when I think about their matches is that I think they seem to have worked because of Danny Hodge's background, and they could have what I guess you call it a more Japanese style match compared to other matches at the time. More grappling,
More
more a
grappling
deeper understanding of grappling, and
on the mat.
also,
Yeah.
of course, Danny Hodge is a Olympic silver medalist, but also we should speak to Hiro Matsuda's pretty strong, pretty crazy conditioning. And that when
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
training his students would also have to kind of be on the same regimen, but he's, Mr. Thousand Squats, so I've read.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, between 1964 and 1974, for 10-year period, I don't know how many times they've met, but the 10-year program, Danny Hodge against Hiro Matsuda for NWA World Junior Heavyweight title for 10-year period. I don't know how many times they had matches, probably hundreds, huh?
I mean, did they have any particular bouts that I mean, aside from the title change, were there any that, were notable from around that time in the South or, like.
But not too many photos are there and no videotape is available. And they did that in Japan too in 1967. I'll get to it. That Hiro Matsuda was another the pioneer part of his legacy was that he came back to Japan 1966. Actually, he came back into Japan after Rikidozan died, and he and Duke Keomuka brought their NWA World Tag Team title to Japan. And Hiro Matsuda became very first Japanese wrestler who introduced German suplex hold
uh,
in Japanese ring
that's you
before
mentioned
Inoki was
that.
doing it. The Korogach was yeah, Rikidozan days that the Korogach, showed the original German suplex. He was the only wrestler doing it, and there must be the time. I asked both Carl and both Hiro Matsuda about how they became friends, but wasn't friend at the end of the time or something that they wouldn't talk. They weren't talking to each other or something. And I spoke with both because it was obvious that it was Korogach who taught Hiro Matsuda how to do the German
Hmm.
suplex, right? But they weren't really like friends. When I went to visit them in 80s, I went to visit both of them, but they weren't talking about each other. So I kind of kept my mouth shut. I should have asked more, but it was obviously Carl Gotch who taught young Hiro Matsuda how to do the perfect German suplex. And Hiro Matsuda brought the German suplex back to Japan, and then but he wasn't there to stay. He went back home with Duke Keomuka. His home was Tampa, Florida. Okay, and in 1966, along with Isao Yoshiwara, Hiro Matsuda became very first promoter in Japan that started the second company that was IWE. International Wrestling Enterprise. We talk about the
Mhm.
company, quite a bit, right? That the IWE was the wrestling company that existed between 1966 to all the way to 1981, 15-year period, and always a kind of a second company. But it was interesting that they always had network television, that Channel 6 and Channel 12 a little bit later on, that JWA, Nippon Pro Wrestling, is like almost like monopoly and such a establishment. But IWE too had the network television program 7 o'clock on Wednesday night, and I when I became wrestling fan as a kid, I watched Korogachi against Billy
Mm.
Robinson in Japan, Channel 6, and two gaijins that wrestle against each other, and way back when in the when I started watching in the 60s, that Japanese wrestler automatic babyface and American wrestlers automatic heel,
That was
basically,
the
huh?
template, yeah.
But on this yeah, and like international champion Giant Baba, who is American challenger. Even it was Gene Kaniski or Bruno Sammartino or Bobo Brazil or Fritz von Erich, somebody like that. They were all automatic heel. Anyhow, that the IWE Japan IWE company was a very interesting company that did a lot of new things. American against American. Well, Billy Robinson, not an American, from UK, and Carl Gotch at the time was living in America, but we thought he was German. Okay, so two European wrestlers, doing a wrestling match against one another. It's all clean wrestling, like today's almost MMA catch as catch can. I mean, like super good wrestling. And IW Japan was an interesting company that introduced young monster Rushmov, later on who become under the giant. And IW Japan was the kind of company that introduced cage match into Japan. And all the Japanese wrestlers with IW had a English name, Strong Kobayashi, Thunder Sugiyama, Great Kusatsu, Russia Kimura, Animal Hamaguchi, Mighty Inoue. They all had ring names, which was also very IW. And you have that Hiro Matsuda and the promoter Isao Yoshiwara started IWE company, and that the Hiro Matsuda was going to be the top talent. Okay, and that they started the company in 1966. They were going to bring in pure American style professional wrestling instead of Rikido and Baba style. And it was more domestic, right? That Sure enough, that the Hiro Matsuda brought Danny Hodge over, and they did the exact same 60-minute grappling, like really high technical professional wrestling style that he wanted to introduce in Japan, and they did this 60-minute time limit title match in Japan, and but following one more thing in January 1967 tour that the IWE new company wasn't strong enough, and Antonio Inoki's first outlaw company Tokyo Pro Wrestling was like almost like running out of business and could run out of money, all these things. So January tour, they put Inoki's Tokyo Pro Wrestling and Hiro Matsuda's IWE company put together. They had a joint tour, and that that 1967 the Pioneer Tour they call it, they brought back Hiro Matsuda and Inoki's NWA Tag Team title. I don't know if they really held it at the time, but they really did win that the Southern Tag Team title in Tennessee in January 1965 or so. That the young Inoki and Hiro Matsuda beat the Masked Medics in Tennessee and got the tag team title. And it was the title that they was in the magazine. So I guess they claimed that they still had this NWA tag team title. So they defended the title against people like Eddie Graham, the Sammy Steamboat, that Grizzly Smith, the Kentuckians, and who not that the American wrestlers, the Hiro Matsuda brought in. So that was the very beginning of IWE that Hiro Matsuda was involved. But later on in that year, that Channel 6 TBS pretty much took over IWE and renamed it TBS Pro Wrestling and pushed Matsuda out of the way, you know. And Hiro Matsuda basically said, fuck it, and excuse my language, that he packed up and left and went back home. Home is America. And that he never looked back and he never worked IWE again.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It
Are you
was
with
the
me on that?
first,
Yeah.
we think of wrestling in Japan, we think of the big two. But
New
sure,
Japan and Old
I think
Japan?
most
It wasn't even there
right.
until 1972.
And IWE was one of the first companies that brought certain aspects of pro wrestling.
Yeah, 'cause there's another wrestling out
It
there.
brought in
Yeah.
the international aspect. It also had a kind of a more raw or rough, almost like a Crockett style approach or production compared with All Japan and New Japan at the time. It was a little more. You would the first time that I've seen the word death match used in wrestling was with IWE. I think. I don't know. Yeah, like a cage match. Yeah,
Russia Kimura against with the Alexis
yeah,
Smirnoff or like a Gypsy Joe or
or
something like that.
Stomper,
Ox Baker.
Stomper Goldie.
Yeah, Stumper, Killer Tim Brooks, and yeah. Before that, they were bringing in all kinds European wrestlers. You know, aged Carl Gotch, young Billy Robinson, the Jeff Porch, Tony Charles, Sean Reagan, the George Gordienko, the Hurst Hoffman, the European wrestler were brought in. So I thought it was very interesting because it was all American heroes in JWA side, you know, that they're all, and then people were led to believe that it was all to it, you know. But IWE really introduced there more to wrestling than that.
Yeah,
Does that make
and that
sense?
spirit is
Yeah, they were basically doing. Yeah, they were doing what
Mhm.
JWA weren't doing.
that spirit still exists on the indies in Japan. There are always so many
Right, I
indies,
guess.
and it
Yeah.
seems like indies in Japan, I don't think will have the chance to experience like a boom like it's happened in the States because just the market's different. But and that's fine because while the indie shows are rather small in Japan, they'll never go away because there is that spirit for I like wrestling, but I want it a certain way. The kind of third option is always still there.
And
Yeah, like an
like
alternative.
alternative, and also there are more to wrestling. Yeah, there are all more to wrestling than the big establishment, big league company. Because like you know, Anthony Inoki's New Japan, Jan Baba's heyday Old Japan is so much like your Major League Wrestling that they'll provide you and they'll feed you to certain wrestlers, certain stars in a certain way. If you don't like it,
Mhm.
that's it, right? But IWE really, in hindsight, provided what was missing. Yeah.
So after IWE,
Not the big company though, but after 1968, Hiro Matsuda altogether left the IWE and never looked back and never worked
mhm,
IWE again. But he came back to JWA a number of times to be like a guest, you know, Japanese wrestler, barefooted Japanese wrestler who lived in America. So he's like a half American and half Japanese. Very interesting, much like Masa
mhm,
Saito was later on. Yeah. Yeah. And year after, okay, Jan Baba opens his All Japan Pro Wrestling
mhm,
in 1972, right? And very first inaugural Champion Carnival starts in spring of 1973. Okay, I mean Champion Carnival. I mean today's All Japan still have it
mhm.
50 years later. You know what I'm saying? That Champion Carnival tournament. That very first 1973 All Japan Champion Carnival tournament. Hiro Matsuda was brought
Mm,
in.
yeah.
Interesting, huh? Yeah, and also he worked open tournament. You know, it's a famous open tournament, All Japan, December of 1975. You had Dory Funk, you had Mr. Wrestling, you had Dusty Rose, Dick Murdoch, Don Leo Jonathan, the Baron Von Raschke, I mean, all kinds superstar in it. And there was a 13-year anniversary Ricky Dozan's memorial show that Hiro Matsuda ended up working. Yeah. That was the same night on the other side of the town. Inoki and Billy Robinson had their match at the Sumo Palace. And then 3 miles away, same night that the Nippon Budokan had Rikido's 13-year memorial show that the Giant Baba Destroyer against Jumbo Tsuruta and Dory Funk together, and Hiro Matsuda defended his NWA World Junior Heavyweight title against Mighty Inoue of IWE.
Mm.
The history is interesting, huh?
When I got a
Yeah.
question for you about this time with Hiro Matsuda, because you
Yeah.
said around still active
He was still active
and he
wrestler.
was going between Japan and the States. Did he right?
Mainly in America. By then, he was a part owner of NWA Florida, Championship Wrestling from Florida. Eddie Graham, Dusty Rhodes, Duke Keomuka, and Hiro Matsuda. Those were the owners.
Would you say when he would wrestle in Japan, would he change his style in Japan? Did he wrestle the same way? Did he wrestle like he did in America when he would come back?
Well, I did not really watch Hiro Matsuda's match in America. I think he utilized more kicks and chops rather in America, and he wrestled more grappling, like a really old fashioned grappling Korogachi style in Japan, a little bit more.
Because I remember,
Yeah,
sure,
and Okana
yeah, I
roll.
remember, seeing clips and you see, like we talked about earlier, the coming into the ring with the kimono and doing the karate chops and
Right,
I'm
right,
trying to
right.
think. I remember seeing with Dusty Rhodes, and he's kind of like a heel,
Right.
kind of like Great Muta or Great Kabuki.
Mhm.
Not as extreme, of course, but
Well, yeah, of course, you still have very stereotypical Japanese way of
he was
working it.
doing what he knew.
Yeah, he didn't throw
No,
salt or anything, but yeah, karate chop and kick,
I mean,
barefooted, plain
it
black
played
trunks.
to the crowd pretty well back then.
Yeah, and also his second finishing maneuver was abdominal stretch, which Danny Hodge and Hiro Matsuda shared. Abdominal stretch. In Japan, it's Cobra
right.
Twist. Yeah. Also, Cobra Twist was Antonio Inoki's very early finish too. Those are
He
very
also had
interesting
the
things.
sleeper, the famous sleeper in the States.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. He didn't do
They
the
would call
sleeper
it something
holding
like
in
the
Japan.
master
No.
of the Oriental sleeper, something like that.
Okay. There is no such
That's
thing
right.
as Oriental sleep.
But that was the time back then where it was easier to make something up. But if you didn't know anything about it, it sounded pretty exotic.
You just assume all Japanese
Yeah, I mean, if
wrestlers
you don't
do.
know anything else about Japan, what gives you a reason not to? So that's what it was like back then.
Right. And also, it was like very important that he was doing a perfect looking, bridging German suplex before Inoki was doing it.
But he just, he wasn't working in Japan the same way or the same time. Different path.
Yeah. And what was interesting was though, when Hiro Matsuda was working for Baba's All Japan, or I should say Baba was using Hiro Matsuda, he was like babyface guest. You know what I'm saying? Like a guest appearance. Then 1977, he switched sides from Baba's All Japan to Inoki's Japan, changed the affiliate. That changed the landscape a little bit. That all the NWA Florida wrestlers started coming to New Japan, Inoki's side. Young Steve Kern, or even Jack Briscoe worked dates in New Japan a little bit, and a lot of Florida wrestlers started coming to New Japan. And also, like a young Ricky Choshu went to Florida, and a lot of Japanese wrestlers went to Florida. Younger Killer Khan, the Kendo Narasaki, or even Kabuki before he was
Keiji
great
Muto
Kabuki.
too.
They were
Okay. We're
that's
still in the
80s,
70s.
85,
I jumped
86,
ahead a little bit.
87.
In the 70s, yeah.
Yeah. Right. But Mr. Sato or younger Tenru, when Tenru was rookie in the first tour, he was trained under Dory Funk and Terry Funk in Amarillo, and went back home and spent a year. And he had a second trip. Tenru went back to America and worked another year. And that time he worked Florida, the Georgia, the North Carolina. He was pretty much based in Florida. And then Hiro Matsuda influence was clearly there. Yeah. I mean, somebody like working as a liaison for Japanese company and Japanese wrestler to be working in the States, you need connection. And Hiro Matsuda was there, like not on camera person, but he was there as a booker, he was there as a promoter, he was there as a producer. Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about it too. This role that Hiro Matsuda kind of created, he had to create for himself. This kind of work, so that role is still a common function, both for big Japanese companies working with overseas companies, or just the idea and process of having that point person overseas. There was no
Yeah.
kind of demonstration of how to do it. There was no way. There was no guide. So I think it's so
Yeah. And also he paved the way. He went to America with no
right,
connection, but he just made his own
unheard of
way
in that time.
as an active wrestler. Yeah, yeah. So that is why we have to really. I wouldn't want to say like I'm not arrogant enough to say educate the younger audience, the podcast listener out there, but we need to learn about really learn about legacy of Hiro Matsuda.
Well,
It's
I
been so
think it's
overlooked.
clear he has had an influence both on not like I said, Japanese pro wrestling business, but also, and probably even more so on the American side, the Southern Territories American wrestling. He was there for it. And in the 70s, I don't know, when did he stop wrestling as much? When did Hiro Matsuda become less of an active?
I think he wrestles uh, on and off until like
But
1990 almost.
when did he become more of a trainer and more and less of full time? End of the
Like
70s.
end of
Okay.
70s. Yeah, yeah. Because end of 70, like 76, he trained. Obviously, he trained Paul Orndorff and Hulk Hogan, right? And like 84, 85, he trained people like Lex Luger and Ron Simmons. And end of 70s, he was training Ray Hernandez,
Mhm.
later on Hercules. And so I think then, yeah, end of 70s, he was already more of a trainer. Then when he wanted to be in the ring, he did. Yeah. And also he had a program against babyface version of Dusty Rhodes. See, Dusty Rhodes, until he came to Florida and made his home base there in Florida, he was Texas Outlaws. Tag team combination, Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch together as big heel tag team. And the heel Paxson and somebody else, the turn on Dusty Rhodes, that made Dusty Rhodes big, big, huge babyface in Florida, and Hiro Matsuda was right there. Yeah, and then babyface Dusty Rhodes against heel Hiro Matsuda program was there, and in Florida, in the local territory, Florida. But it was like a main event. Yeah,
So he was training wrestlers from the early '80s, mid '80s, and there was at that time we talked.
late
What
70s into
when did he?
early 80s, and
Oh, go ahead.
also there was a very important match in 1978 that in storyline, he formed all these free agent Japanese wrestlers together and invaded New Japan. Hiro Matsuda, Masa Saito, Umanosuke Ueda, Thunder Sugiyama, and Ryuma Go. Like a five of big freelance Japanese heels invaded Japanese ring. Much like your later on Ishingun, the Riki Choshu, or 90s NWO
Mhm.
kind of storyline. And then there was a tournament pre Nippon Championship. There was no such thing as Japan Heavyweight Championship, right? But there was a tournament. There was five Hiro Matsuda's, army, that Hiro Matsuda, Masa Saito, that Umanosuke Ueda, the Thunder Sugiyama, the Ryuma Go. They challenged the New Japan, and at the tournament final, it was Inoki against Hiro
Wow.
Matsuda. So I think that was the last big,
What
big,
year
big
was that?
match Hiro Matsuda had in Japan.
78.
78. Yeah, and then Inoki sure beat Hiro Matsuda with his octopus. That the moderate version of abdominal stretch, but it's octopus this time. That Inoki beat Hiro Matsuda, that kingpin of this free agent Japanese heels. But by then, that the New Japan Pro Wrestling and NWA Florida had this almost like a partnership, you know. And I think Hiro Matsuda was the one who put together the pieces. Yeah, because up until then, NWA meant All Japan Pro Wrestling
That's
Giant Baba's affiliate. Huh? So we learned that one of the NWA strong territory can be partner of New Japan. Yeah. And dream match like Dusty Rhodes against Inoki happened that year. Yeah. I mean, following year, 79. Yeah. And all kinds of, American superstar started making appearance in New Japan ring instead of All Japan. And at the same time that Inoki already had the partnership with Vince McMahon Senior's WWF, right? So it's not like when Korogach was booking talent for New Japan in the very early 70s, they didn't have many famous superstar American in New Japan ring. But with Hiro Matsuda's NWA, Florida affiliate, that all kinds of superstar Americans start making appearance for Inoki's New Japan Pro Wrestling. So that was also the element that it's the historical that the thing that it's been so overlooked. Yeah, I would say Hiro Matsuda was instrumental in doing so.
And aside from training wrestlers in the '80s, throughout the '80s, he would appear in Crockett Promotions, sometimes WCW or whatever it's called during the late '80s.
Yeah, as
That's right.
Ric
Yeah,
Flair's manager sometimes, or the fictitious Japanese big conglomerate company called Masaki
yeah, that's right.
Corporation.
It was also the time. It was the bubble
You know what I'm saying?
too. So it really was topical during the late '80s into the early '90s that Japan is taking over the world. Their economy is so strong. Yeah, that was there was like fear, and I think WCW wanted to feed right.
Yeah, and it didn't really matter how many years Hiro Matsuda was in America. He always had this strong Japanese accent, right? Doing interview, yeah, that was stereotypical way, I guess, But right, but he was part of NWA office though, yeah, and he was maybe one of the very few wrestlers who never came
Right.
home.
Yeah, he was one of the
You know?
first.
He became American citizen. Oh man, yeah, like Masa Saito, the Great Kabuki, or Kendo Narasaki, Killer Khan. They spent 10, 15 years, 20 years in America, but they eventually came home, huh?
What Hiro Matsuda did,
Hiro
he
Matsuda
not
never
only
came
didn't
home.
come home, he became more involved in the American wrestling
citizen.
business than the Japanese part of it. So his career ended up being rooted here in the state. So
yeah. So the very unique,
I think he
isolated
might have been the
case
first
of that.
wrestler to establish that can do that. You don't have to belong to one of the big companies. And I mean, yeah.
I mean, he was the only one did that. Yeah. Well, he spent time in America, but he came home and became superstar. Giant Baba spent a couple years in America, toured, but eventually he came back to Japan to be the guy, right? So Hiro Matsuda chose to stay in America. Yeah. And also he was part of the WCW, WCW at the beginning, because if you remember, Jim Hart era to Kip Fry era to Bill Watts era of WCW, remember? Until Eric Bischoff era. That during this Bill Watts era of WCW, there was a beginning of G1 Climax tournament in New Japan. If you remember the early first couple years of G1 tournament, if you watch videos, over on the other side of the ring, Dusty Rhodes, Bill Watts, all sitting in the ringside as a witness, right? Hiro Matsuda was always there too.
He was the official.
He was in the very early Tokyo Dome show that he brought in a lot of wrestlers from America, and then he was Bill Watts and Hiro Matsuda. They were like a working partner for decades by then. Yeah. From Oklahoma, Louisiana to Florida to wherever. And then it was both promoters and bookers. Yeah. So that different era. And Inoki, I think Hiro Matsuda really helped Inoki do the business with the American side of it, but never was on camera or it was never introduced as this is the guy who did it. Hiro Matsuda pretty much choose to be behind the camera. It was never on camera like this is the guy who put together WCW deal with New Japan. Well, the Masa Saito was involved too, but the Masa and Hiro Matsuda were really, really good friends. And I'll tell you one episode. I told you one time that like every other year or so during 90s, late 80s into 90s, then New Japan Pro Wrestling invite Hiro Matsuda over for not to work in the ring, but the business and tour and negotiation and other things that New Japan will invite Hiro Matsuda over. Then they provide nice big hotel in Tokyo, right? And then instead, that Hiro Matsuda said, "No, I'm not staying in hotel." And then he comes to Masa Saito's condominium and sleep on his their couch. So they go out and have a good time. It was very interesting. He gets up in the morning, he does his 200 push up and 200 sit ups so they can go out and drink. I mean, this is just old fashioned guy. I went to Masa's apartment, while sorry
All
that the
right.
Kiki is saying
Hello.
okay. All right. Sorry about that. He's just passing through. Yeah. So I was okay with because he is really old fashioned. Okay. That he wouldn't talk to anybody unless you're a wrestler, But the master told him I'm okay. So, so I was okay with, he was okay with me. And I asked a lot of different questions like stupid wrestling Mark, But yeah, man, because old fashioned guy, I mean, he's from before my time and I wanted to know how he formed IWE or how he left IWE or what was a match like with Danny Hodge or what it's like to be a part owner of NWA company or how it was like to train Hulk Hogan.
Mm.
You got to ask those questions, right?
Oh, that's what people want to know. I mean, fans want to know.
Yeah. Yeah, and then he answered pretty much. And a couple years later, I was sent to Florida to do a big magazine interview for Hulk Hogan. You know that that was right between and WWE and the year before he signed with WCW. He was doing the movie Thunder in Paradise. So I was going to location, place, and I had the appointment at Hulk Hogan's trailer. That the big trailer that we use as his dressing room. I mean, that's like where he eats lunch and rest or read through your scenario or whatever. That he was there, and Hiro Matsuda volunteered to drive to the location for me. Yeah,
So he let you in on
are you
the
with me on that?
kind of. I mean, this was a time too when Hulk Hogan was a megastar, big, big. He was.
Oh, huge. I
That's
met
right.
Hulk
Yeah,
Hogan
but
way
at this
before that,
time,
though.
like you said,
Yeah.
like you describing, Hollywood Hulk Hogan. This is kind of where the name came from because he took a break and did movies, and then came this.
Movies. Yeah, so that was the location he was doing all day, all week. The Thunder in Paradise. And how many times can you imagine how many times you get your ID checked until we get to the location,
Mhm.
the trailer? And it was before your cell phone. I mean, a few years before your cell phone. And at the first place that you get, who are you? It's just, you get ID checked. What we did was had Hiro Matsuda call up Jimmy Hart, and Jimmy Hart, came running and got us. That was really great. So with Hiro Matsuda and Jimmy Hart, I was able to get to Hulk Hogan's trailer. That's what I'm trying to get to. And Hiro Matsuda was happy to see the Hulk Hogan. I mean, first time in years too, right? So I witnessed how they talk to
What
each
a
other.
story,
It
and
was
what a guy
interesting.
Mr.
Yeah.
Matsuda was to help you out like that.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. Oh, I'm
Mm.
so grateful to this day. Yeah. And he is while he was driving, of course, we talked wrestling all through and all back, and had dinner and talked more wrestling. Yeah. So yeah, he was very, very old fashioned, and didn't really believe in wrestling school. That it's not how you teach wrestlers, how to work. You had to be somebody handpicked by somebody who was wrestler, and you have to be trained very privately. And yeah, that's exactly what he did. Yeah, he didn't believe in wrestling school or the place like Monster Factory. He hated like a place like a Monster Factory who anybody can get in paying, a couple $1,000 to have lessons, right? I mean, how are they going to learn anything, And And it's just how are they gonna learn anything from Larry Sharp or something? And he was really vocal about it. He hated the idea of wrestling school.
That's very
Isn't that interesting?
interesting. He seemed to have a very specific philosophy on how to train, or rather, how a wrestler should be trained.
Or get
Right.
somebody in the business.
It seemed like
Yeah.
that Matsuda believed that you really needed to have the physical part of wrestling down. You had to have your body ready to go, and you had to understand how to be an athlete before you could even start learning about matches and
also lecture your
Mhm.
trainee individually,
Right. It's
like a
not like a
mentor them.
class; it's like a apprenticeship.
Or like how to take bump 1 and bump 2 and bump 3, and yeah, how to do the proper uh collar and elbow tie up. It's like you just have to learn by
Mm.
wrestling me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's where Hulk Hogan's, the arm or leg being broken by Hiro Matsuda story, came from.
From one of those training sessions.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think he really broke. I mean, meant to break Hulk Hogan's leg or arm or elbows or anything like that. But by doing arm lock Kimura or something, maybe Hulk Hogan's shoulder got dislocated or something. But to put that back in socket right away or something, I don't know. But it was his way of method, or not just Hiro Matsuda, but all those old-fashioned coaches
Yeah,
were
it
doing
wasn't
it
just
at the time.
Matsuda, it was
Yeah,
Lee Anderson, and it was other
Bob Roop. Yeah,
so
yeah. Or Korogachi, of course. The Korogachi, it goes, right back to Korogachi Rikishoshu's story too. See, a lot of people to this day that believe that the Korogachi straight Rikishoshu and young Rikishoshu packed up and left. Right? Not true. It was like rookie Rikishoshu wanted to learn how
yeah,
to
he was
work,
ready. He had already been
right?
to the
But
Olympics.
yeah, all Korogachi will give you is conditioning training all day long, right? Then for young Ricky Choshis, oh, I've done this, all these in all college year, and I went to Olympic and all these. Just teach me how to work. It wasn't like that with Korogachi. So it's not like Korogachi stretched Ricky Choshi and Ricky Choshi packed up and left. Actually, he in the same summer, Ricky Choshi and Hiro Matsuda made a tag team and worked Florida territory until Ricky Choshi moved to Montreal and then worked another year. So lot of the old like old fashioned stories being like almost like has another chapter in the myth and legend. It became completely different story by now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Does that make sense? Yeah. But for Hiro Matsuda, that he was working as a policeman for wrestling company to protect the business. He only coached the ones that has good physique and good athletic background and has potential. Then he might train you. And the ones he trained and debuted and became star, that proves it.
Yeah, very
You
much
know,
so.
yeah, the name like yeah, how Hogan, Paul Orndorff, the Ron Simmons, the Lex Luger, the Keiji Muto, there was another person, that Ed Gantner or something, who didn't quite make it, and there was another guy, Ninja Warrior, that who didn't quite make it. There's a couple guys didn't make it, but I can't forget the Hercules too. Ray Hernandez, and later on
And you
Hercules, he was
mentioned
a
he
big star
also
too.
had a good deal training part of Keiji Muto's early career in the States.
Right after Young Lion 1 year, and he came to Florida to grow his hair and then to work in the ring for a whole year and then learn the language and whole bit, that Hiro Matsuda was there for him. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Very
Very, very interesting
influential.
career.
If you take
Very influential.
Matsuda out of it,
And
we don't have a lot of history.
right. But later on that he wasn't as fortunate because WCW meant that NWA Florida was already out of
Mhm.
business. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, because WWF Vince McMahon took over the entire country, and NWA Crockett expanded the territory, but didn't do well. That the NWA Crockett had to sell it to Ted Turner, the whole company, and then the NWA Crockett became WCW. And after WCW was established, it was all like corporate, right? And no more NWA territory. It's kind of one big company, WCW. And WCW, Hiro Matsuda was involved too. But until like Bill Watts era, And this is not to badmouth Eric Bischoff, but after Eric Bischoff era, he did not know who Hiro Matsuda was
Ah,
at all. I mean, didn't know who is that, kind of thing. And he basically fired Hiro Matsuda, not knowing who he really was. Unfortunate, right?
Eric.
Well, he fired injured
Oh
Steve
yeah, this famous
Austin.
story and Sean Waltman.
He fired Mean Mark, who later
Mm-hmm.
on becomes Undertaker. Remember? Yeah,
Scott Hall.
and yeah, so
Ah,
it's just like one of these stories that the Hiro Matsuda was basically fired by somebody who didn't even know who he was, who Hiro Matsuda was. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not here to badmouth Eric Bischoff about it, but he just didn't know, you know. But I guess if it was somebody else, that could happen too. It was Hiro Matsuda was from like a really old-fashioned establishment that the while wrestling business was becoming more and more corporate or
mhm.
TV-oriented business instead of wrestling
Yeah,
business. You know
yeah.
what I'm saying?
Well, wrestling was changing
Yeah,
around then. The wrestling really
and
changed
then
in the 80s and 90s.
yeah, that's very much in the mid '90s into new millennium, and mid '90s until 2001, it was all WWF against
Right.
WCW. That's it, Monday Night War. Yeah, and I guess that's how Hiro Matsuda's legacy and what he meant was pretty much
Seems
lost in
so.
shuffle, huh? Yeah, yeah. That's why we have to really dig this out and let people know
Yeah,
who
that's our
Hiro
job.
Matsuda was. And the last, yeah, and last real Japanese wrestler who were really, really good friend, who became good friend with Hiro Matsuda was Osamu
Hmm.
Nishimura, who was New Japan wrestler, but who were living in Florida at the time, and he took this like if nobody's get in contact with these legends, I would, because it's like that was Osamu Nishimura's opportunity to become friends with Karl Gotch, become friends with Hiro Matsuda, and all these all the buddy called or all these Florida legends. Yeah, and he
Hmm.
enjoyed it. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
we shouldn't forget how,
So
influential
and,
he's been on both Japanese and American wrestling. It's pretty, I mean, there was no one before him, and so
yeah,
it's
and also he was one of the very first Japanese wrestler who got the green
right.
card in America and decided to live in America and become American citizen, and he never went back to Japan.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And I just got the piece of paper. Yeah, recorded last active wrestling match Hiro Matsuda had was December of 1990, the exhibition match against Osamu Kido
I
in
see.
Yokohama Arena.
1990.
Yeah. In 19 in 1999, November 26th, he died of colon cancer. Yeah.
But he left such an
So
impact
yeah.
on the business. Again, I mean, it's hard not to stress it. I mean, from the, I mean, if he was just a trainer, look at how much
Mhm.
influence he's had. But I mean, before that, in Japan,
As an active wrestler in Japan, in America too, big main event, 60s and 70s. He got NWA World Junior Heavyweight title in two different era. One time he beat Danny Hodge. Second time he beat Ken Mantell and got the white globe belt. That let's show
mm,
the picture. And so he was active, wrestler 20-year period just in America. And he had an occasional trip to Japan and always had a main event status. Kind of guest appearance though, but still
mm,
treated as a main event guy. Yeah. And had a run with All Japan, Baba's All Japan Pro Wrestling as like a American Japanese, like a babyface guest appearance. But with Inoki in that ring, he chose to be heel and had a single match against Inoki.
mm,
So that was big one too. Yeah, it's the same way Masa felt. See, if Masa Saito was a babyface in the same corner with Inoki and Sakaguchi or Fujinami, he would be like a third or fourth guy, right? Yeah, probably. But instead, Masa Saito choose to be in the other side of the ring as a big time heel, then having a single match program against Antonio Inoki. That's what he wanted, you know. So Hiro Matsuda and Masa pretty much the same, just Matsuda 10, 15 years older. Yeah. Oh, 10 years older, maybe? Yeah. Yeah. But if it wasn't for somebody like Hiro Matsuda, other Japanese wrestler wouldn't have be able to do any
Right.
of
I
these
mean,
things.
these days it's more and more common to see wrestlers from Japan maybe move over here.
But the short
Short
trip,
trip. That's right. Or I mean, either facilitated or unfacilitated. It's more common, and people learned how to do it. And I think people like Hiro Matsuda are important in showing how people in the business can move around and be successful without being attached to a company. You can have success as a freelancer, and you can carve out your own route.
yeah, and then not exactly college educated, but he spoke three languages: Japanese,
Right.
Spanish, and English. Yeah, then became part
Right.
owner
That's
of
another.
the company.
That's another
Oh
big
my
thing.
God!
First, Japanese wrestling businessmen to have and do business in the States regularly. That's not. It was not common. It still isn't common.
Right, and also like in early 80s, he was in charge of selling Japanese, I mean, New Japan video footage to
Mhm.
European market. Yeah, but when that was also another obstacle that when Ted Turner, WCW company took over Crockett, and WCW became partnership with New Japan, and that the Hiro Matsuda trying to sell New Japan programming into European market that the WCW should be doing now or something because it's Ted Turner TV company, right? So that's another obstacle that the I guess that the new management didn't want Hiro Matsuda around for. Yeah. So it's like somewhat a victim of circumstance that in early 90s. Yeah, in a way. Yeah. But he didn't really want to do it, that he was no longer active wrestler, and he wasn't really training any new wrestlers at the time because it's so corporate, WCW. If it was Florida, local territory, and debut a rookie in Florida and send the guy to Pensacola or Atlanta or different territory that existed, that you're on your own, go ahead, right? I mean, work in territory and become somebody. But it was in 90s, it was either WWF or WCW. It's all two big company, big establishment. The structure was so
Yeah, it seems
different.
like Matsuda was a product of the territorial days. He like when you brought up
Yeah,
Eric
definitely,
Bischoff, he's a
definitely.
great
Yeah,
example of someone who wasn't brought up during the territorial days. He was brought post territorial days. He was TV era. Different philosophies and
pretty much. Yeah. Although he started with dying days
sure,
of
sure.
AWA. Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
culture changed and then wrestling changed. And I think a lot of his peers
Hmm.
from the Southern Territories also, would phase out around this time too.
And his contemporary friends, Dusty Rhodes, no longer with us. Duke Keomka, Eddie Graham, Mike Graham, all these,
Mm.
they're all gone. Yeah, yeah. Korogach, Malenko, all gone. Yeah. That's why we have to really, look into these influential historical figure, wrestler, promoter, producer, trainer, very
Mhm.
influential, people. And Hiro Matsuda
And
is
I think when you
definitely one
learn
of them.
all of this and then you go back and watch, I think it helps you appreciate everything.
There's an interesting footage that when Masa Saito and Mr. Sato, the great kabuki, but back then it was Mr. Sato. Mr. Saito and Mr. Sato debuted again in Florida, and babyface Hiro Matsuda was doing the commentary on the table with Gordon Soley, and Masa Saito and Mr. Sato attacks Hiro Matsuda in the broadcasting table and beat him up. There's the footage out there.
I'll try to
It's
find that.
very interesting.
All right, so I think this is a good time to wrap it up.
Yeah, Gordon Soley is another name. Yeah, it's the
Another
same
name
era.
that kind of
Yeah.
disappeared at around the same time. That's just how
Mhm.
it still didn't
Yeah, the all
doesn't take
old-fashioned
anything away
personality.
from the
Yeah.
influence and impact folks like Matsuda or Matsuda himself had on I think that's one of those cool
Mhm.
things that we can learn and take from. So, a lot to take from. So, if you have questions, if listeners
Very
have
good.
questions out there, Fumi, how can? Oh, well, what's that? What's
Something
that?
we left out. It wasn't on purpose. I'm just basically talking top of my head
No
right now.
worries.
So
But if we did leave something out and we had somebody had a question, how can
something they
people
need to
reach
know,
you?
yeah. On Twitter, it's Fumihiko at Fumihiko Dayo, FUMIHIKO at Fumihiko Dayo, or just Fumi Saito on Facebook. Message me
And
first.
on Twitter, I'm at Justin M Knipper, KNIPPR. If you have questions, let us know. Send us a message. But yeah, that's it. So for now, until then, Fumi, can you take it away?
So long from Tokyo.